What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's transfer tips for game week 20. So, going to go through some of the popular players being moved in and out of our squads and discuss whether it's a good move or not, or whether or not there's possible alternatives that we could consider instead. So, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and let's jump into it. So let's start off with Luke Shaw, very popular at the moment, not least because he got a 15-pointer in game week 19, but also because slowly Man United are improving defensively, and they've now got that double game week in game week 20 that's confirmed. So it's Man City at home and Crystal Palace away. So there's really two things to discuss. One, is a Man United defender in general a good option? And then two, is Luke Shaw the best of those options? Bearing in mind that at 5.1 million, he is now the most expensive Man United defender. So let's talk about them in general. The short answer is yes. I think they are a good option to look to bring in if you've got a free transfer, possibly for a hit as well. There is a chance that in game week 22, they will also have a double game week. So they could have one in game week 20, then play Arsenal away, then have another double, which will be Crystal Palace at home and Leeds at home. And if you follow Ben Crellin on Twitter, he's talked about this. It's not guaranteed, but it is a possibility. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. I think over the next 6 game weeks, even if they don't have that extra double, things are still looking pretty good. The two toughest fixtures are probably Man City at home and Arsenal away. And unfortunately, they do play those 2 games over the next 2 game weeks. But because all the defenders are 5.1 or below, they are cheap enough to bench against Arsenal away. And yes, Man City at home is not ideal. And of course, they've already conceded 6 goals to them in the league once this season. But I don't think this game will be quite as bad. For one reason, it's at home. 2, you'd hope they would have learnt from any mistakes they made in that game. But also, there's been a few upgrades, right? So I think Malacia played left back in that game, and look, he's a decent enough defender, but I think Luke Shaw is better. So as long as everyone's fit and available, you should see Varane and Martinez as the centre back. So Luke Shaw will play left back, so I think that's a good thing. Martial, as long as he's fit, we'll have to wait and see, will start up front instead of Rashford, which means Rashford will play on the left instead of Sancho, who's obviously not been great this season as well. And the big one is Casemiro will be in that midfield instead of McTominay. So I think you go into that match, and most people would agree that Man City are the favourites, and they probably will score. I'm not expecting a clean sheet, but I don't think it'll be a demolition job like it was in the reverse fixture. And then obviously they get to play Crystal Palace away anyway. So I don't think that double is that bad, even if it's not like a kind of 2 green fixture type thing. And then you look at the rest of the game, which you got Palace at home, Leeds away, Leicester at home, Brentford at home. There's a chance of clean sheets in most of those fixtures. Doesn't mean they're going to go and get 4, but if they could get 2 over those 4 game weeks, that would be pretty good. And all of those teams have ways to kind of hurt Man United. Obviously Zaha at Palace, Rodrigo at Leeds has played well this season. Then Leicester, Daka, Maddison, Vardy, if they're all fit and available, are problems. And then obviously Ivan Toney at Brentford. But like I said, you've got that improvement from Man United. A lot of that is down to Casemiro. I think a lot of that is down to just getting used to how kind of Ten Hag wants to play. Like in the early day, I know it's not been that long ago, but in the early days, there was a lot of kind of playing short, and they still try and do that, but it's not the be-all and end-all. If that ball needs to be cleared, David De Gea will do that. Whereas if you watch the Brentford game, one of the goals was literally a really bad back pass. Sorry, not a back pass, but a pass from De Gea to Eriksen, and it just caused massive, massive problems. Martinez got brought off early, and obviously that's just not the case now. Things have kind of settled down, and there is that improvement. So I think there's a good chance of a few clean sheets. So in general, I think a Man United defender is a good option. Would I take a hit to do that? I'm not so sure. That would probably depend on what happens in game week 22. If that double was confirmed, then or if you thought there was a high chance of that happening, it might be worth the hit for 2 extra fixtures. But either way, I think it's a good use of a transfer. So then we come down to whether Luke Shaw is the best option. So at 4.8 points per match, he is slightly better than someone like Dalot. And I do think those 2 players are really the only defenders people will be looking at. Like if we come over to the FPL page, you got Shaw at 5.1 million, Dalot is 4.7, Varane is 4.8. I don't really know, I guess apart from a surety of minutes, why you'd probably pay more for him than you would for Dalot. Then Martinez is 4.5, so he's a cheap route into the team. But I think you've got to go for one of the fullbacks. Now, recently, Luke Shaw has played a few games at left centre-back, but mostly because Martinez was obviously away with for the World Cup and then came back a little bit later. I think for most games, you're going to see that Varane-Martinez partnership and then Luke Shaw on the left. I just don't know whether it's... like, obviously, if you've got Luke Shaw, you're not selling him, right? That would be absolutely crazy. You take the price rises, you take that 15 point you've already got, happy days. But if you're someone like me who's possibly looking to buy new, I'm not sure whether I should pay an extra 0.4 million for sure over Dalot, who played in the FA Cup. And look, I know Wan-Bissaka played a few games while Dalot was out, and he looked all right. But I just think when Man United are going forward, there's no real comparison. I'm just not sure Wan-Bissaka is ever going to get to that level that Ten Hag needs. And look, he might have to just use him this season because they're probably not going to go out and buy a new right back. But I think when he's fit and available, Dalot is going to play a lot of minutes. And I guess the basic thing for me is, I'm not sure Wan-Bissaka is any more of a risk to Dalot than Malacia is to Shaw. And if anything, I think Malacia is probably a bit more of a problem for Shaw than Wan-Bissaka is on the other side. At least that's what I felt before the World Cup. And I don't know if too much has changed afterwards. Like, Wan-Bissaka played okay, but I wouldn't say he played brilliantly or anything like that. So I think, in general, a Man United defender is a pretty good option despite having to play Man City. I just don't think it'll be a demolition job, but who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong. And Luke Shaw is a perfectly good option. So over 200,000 FPL managers have already brought him in. That's perfectly fine, right? If he doesn't play left back, he could play left centre back, and his minutes are pretty good. But if you haven't already made that transfer, and I know this is the position that I'm in, I'm very tempted to just save 0.4 million and just get Dalot instead. I think against Arsenal away, I'll probably have them on the bench. So if I've got more money to spend out elsewhere, happy days. And then if I need to play him in any of those kind of other 4 game weeks over the next six game weeks, I'm kind of okay to do that. So short answer, I like Man United defenders, I like Luke Shaw, but right now I'm thinking I might just buy Dalot instead. Unless I hear something or read something that kind of tells me I shouldn't do that and I should just pay the extra for Luke Shaw. Let me know what you're doing in the comments below. So Darwin Nunez is one of those players where it feels like he's got to be discussed every single week. If I don't put him in the transfer tips video, I get asked about him in the game week preview or possibly final thoughts. He just seems to frustrate people like nobody else. And he's already been transferred out this week by over 141,000 FPL managers. And I get the frustration. You put him in your squads in game week 17. He's only got 1 assist so far. To put it into perspective, when I show people my team, they always tell me what a bad pick Mason Mount is. And to be fair, they're probably right, but even he has got more points since game week 17, and he's still got 1 fixture to potentially play in against Fulham in game week 19. So although I think Nunez has maybe been a little bit unlucky with the amount of returns, I also get the frustration because he's not cheap. He's 8.9 million, so you're comparing him to maybe the £8 million midfielders, maybe putting a bit more money in defence, and that's kind of where the frustration comes from. As a non-owner, every time I watch him, I'm really worried because of the amount of chances he gets. And I know some people are saying that he's kind of raw and maybe he's not a great finisher, but at some point I do feel like those chances will convert into goals. And if you go and look at the amount of goals he scored for Liverpool this season, it's not that bad at all. And if you think you're saying that he's not great and yet he still managed to score all these goals, what happens when he becomes that little bit better and the goals start rolling in? And looking at the kind of expected goal data, is pretty good, 0.76 per 90 minutes. Actual goals is 0.52 per 90 minutes, so that is quite a bit lower, but I would expect that to kind of come up a little bit rather than, you know, stay the same or get lower. So I do think there is more potential there. And like I discussed, I think for game week 19, overall for Liverpool, he has been scoring goals. And even if you go to actual output instead of XG and all that kind of stuff that I know not everybody likes, he's got 8 returns so far this season in 19 game weeks, 5 goals, 3 assists. But you have to remember, at the start of the season, he got suspended. So he got sent off against Palace, obviously got very frustrated. I'm sure he learnt from that. Missed the next 3 games, then played against Everton, then missed the next game against Brighton. So he didn't get a huge amount of minutes. It's only really from kind of game weeks 14 to 19 where he started to get a bit more regular minutes. And in those game weeks, so what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, he's got 2 assists and 2 goals. So 4 returns in 6 game weeks. It's not that bad. But then, of course, we come back to the fact he's 8.9 million. Now, if I'm thinking about purely forward options to fill those 3 spots, Haaland's everyone's number 1. I think if people had the money, given, you know, their team structure and stuff like that, they would probably have Harry Kane. After that, it gets a bit trickier, right? Newcastle have got some good fixtures now, so you could go for Wilson. If you've got Mitrovic, you're probably not going to use a transfer on him. You could go for Martial because of the double game week this week, even though he hasn't necessarily played that great in terms of actual output himself, but there's not a huge amount of forwards. So I think the only reason I would be looking to sell Nunez is if I'm desperate for Martial for the double, which wouldn't necessarily be a bad move, especially if they have another double in 22, or if I need the money to put elsewhere. For most people, they've already got one or two £8 million midfielders, and outside of Saka, like Kulusevski, will he be fit? I don't think anyone's bringing in Mason Mount right now. Foden, we're not sure about minutes. You know, even Mahrez, that people are getting a bit excited about, it wouldn't be a massive shock for him to go and miss 1 or 2 games over the next few weeks. So there's not a huge amount of money needed in midfield. And then I guess it comes down to the defender comparison. Now, I'm someone that kind of, in a roundabout way, went for Cancelo instead of Nunez. That hasn't worked out too well. And also, there's a chance that Liverpool get a double in 21. It's not guaranteed, but there's a chance. And you might think, okay, well, I'll put that money in defence and get Trent. But then if Liverpool have got a double, so does Nunez. And I think I'd probably, given how Liverpool are defending right now, I'd probably rather have that extra attacker than the defender in there as well. So for me, I don't think anyone's necessarily making a mistake, because I do get the frustration. But unless you need that money for another move, or you really want to go for a double game week like Martial, then I don't really see the need to use a transfer on Nunez right now. Brighton away, Chelsea at home, Wolves away is not necessarily a great fixture run or anything like that. But Liverpool are more than capable of scoring goals. Their XG as a team is just as good as, or not just as good, but it's close to Arsenal and Man City over this season so far. I just think Nunez is worth keeping. He's shown in the FA Cup he can score. We know he can do it because he's done it plenty of times already for Liverpool. It's just whether you need that money. If there is a move that you want to make, then I kind of get it, right? You can downgrade to someone cheaper like Mitrovic or Martial. But if you don't want to do that, I would just keep hold of him and just try and not get quite as frustrated. I'm sure the goals will come sooner rather than later. So I don't know about anyone else, but unless you went for 3 premium attackers in game week 17, the choice was pretty much get Haaland, then pick one of Salah, De Bruyne or Kane. Now I went for Salah, who did all right in game week 17, but hasn't done much since. But I've kind of been okay with that because De Bruyne didn't do much either. And up until the Crystal Palace game, neither had Harry Kane. The problem was, for anyone that didn't own Kane, he then got 3 attacking returns in that game right ahead of a double game week, just to remind us about how good he can be. And to be fair, I know he's been great this season. Some of that has been overshadowed by the Haaland talk. For example, Kane is on 7.1 points per game. He's got 19 attacking returns in only 18 matches. So he has been brilliant. I already knew that. But still, when you get that reminder ahead of a double game week, it does make you think a little bit more. And I did what I suspect a lot of other people did, started looking at how I might be able to get Harry Kane in my team, whether that's sacrificing Salah or just taking a load of hits instead. Now, I have called on that a little bit, partly because the Man United and Crystal Palace double has been announced, so there are other ways you could possibly spend your transfers that are easier to reach, like getting in a Man United defender or another Man United attacker, but also because of the yellow card situation. Look, we've been in this situation in FPL over many years now. Everyone remember back to Diogo Costa at Chelsea, when a lot of us didn't go for him because he was on a yellow card. He kept on scoring. I don't think he ever ended up getting suspended, or if he did, it was after quite a few matches and quite a few FPL points. But Harry Kane is in a similar situation to what Mitrovic was for his double. So if he gets a yellow card against Arsenal, he would miss the Man City game. And if he gets a yellow card against Man City, he'll then miss the Fulham game in game week 20. Now, you might be sitting there saying, well, you're a bit of a hypocrite because you did recommend Mitrovic. You even ended up captaining him. And that is correct. And so far, that's been okay. He outscored obviously Haaland. We'll have to wait and see what Kepa and Mason Mount do in the second game against Fulham, but I just wasn't sure about them, so I wanted to go for Mitrovic. But the big difference was there wasn't too many other players to consider for captaincy. With Harry Kane, especially if you're already on 2 other premiums, you're mostly going to captain Haaland anyway, so you're not bringing him in for this double to captain him, so that's kind of not as big of a reason to need him, right? He's still a really good option. If you've got an easy route to him that doesn't mean too many other sacrifices, I still think he's a really good transfer in. But for a lot of people, especially if you've got Haaland plus one of those premium midfielders, it's probably not worth sacrificing one of them for someone that you're not going to captain, that also has 2 difficult fixtures and is 1 yellow card away from a suspension. So I think anyone that's watching this video that owns Harry Kane is probably sitting there really happy that I've just said that, because they're thinking you're making a mistake not getting this guy. He's been on form all season. Yes, it's 2 tough fixtures, but we know he can score in both of those games, and you're telling people not to get him. And obviously I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just giving an opinion, but that is kind of what I'm thinking right now. It's also worth noting he is scoring goals at 0.84 per 90 minutes, but his XG is only 0.46, so could there be a little bit of regression there? Possibly. Ultimately, I think he's going to continue to get pretty regular returns, either goals or assists over the next 6 game weeks. And obviously at 11.6 million, he's cheaper than both Salah and De Bruyne. But there is a chance that Salah will get a double game week in 21, although we would probably know that before the game week 20 deadline if that's going to happen. Also, De Bruyne has a double this week and he has a double in 23, so he's probably not worth sacrificing either. And if you're then looking at -4s, -8s, even -12s just to get Kane, a player you're probably not going to captain, I don't think it's worth it. So it's all going to come down to your team structure and how easy it is to get him in. For some people, you got Darwin, Nunez, and possibly 2 free transfers or even money in the bank, and you can get from Nunez to Kane very easily. And if you're in that situation, I'm quite jealous. But for those of you that are in a similar position to me, I think we just have to not worry about it too much and just hope he does a Mitrovic and gets a yellow card in that first game. So I was looking through the most popular transfers in and out ahead of game week 20, and I was a little bit surprised to see that Nick Pope had been transferred in by over 100,000 FPL managers. And I kind of get it. Newcastle have performed very well so far this season. The fixture run looks pretty good as well. But ultimately, I don't see why you would buy Nick Pope right now. There might be a time in the future where he's the best option. But if you wanted to double up on the Newcastle defence, like if you've already got Trippier, it's cheaper to go for someone like Botman as one of your defenders. And I know that Nick Pope might get more points than Botman through saves and stuff like that. But also, I think it's worth saving the money and then using that elsewhere, possibly on a different goalkeeper. But even if it's not a Newcastle double up thing, for 5.4 million you can go and buy Ederson instead. Now again, Ederson is not that exciting as a goalkeeper option in FPL because he doesn't get a huge amount of save points. We know that kind of thing that everyone talks about when they lose the clean sheet. It's usually a 1 or 2 pointer for him. But right now, bearing in mind this is for people that are buying a goalkeeper apparently this week, he's got a double game week, not the best one, but he's got the extra fixture. He also has a double game week in 23, and a lot of people are looking at Man City defenders this week, and I'm going to discuss them more in tomorrow's video, and they're not quite sure who exactly is nailed on. You know who is nailed on? Ederson. So if you are thinking I really need to replace a goalkeeper this week, and I've got 5.4 million to spend, I'm not sure why you wouldn't go for him over Nick Pope, unless you just think that, you know, the Newcastle defence is almost just as good, but Pope gets saves as well, then maybe it's worth it. But I think in the short term, like up until game week 25, you got 2 extra fixtures, and then you got a pretty good fixture run anyway. Nottingham Forest, Bournemouth, Newcastle, but it's a home game, Crystal Palace away, West Ham. Like, I wouldn't necessarily want Ederson from now until the end of the season, but at some point, and I don't know what the answer is right now, we are probably going to wildcard around here anyway. So you're not keeping him for a huge amount of time, but you are getting those extra fixtures in. So I wanted to include this just because I was so surprised about how many people have brought him in. And look, the 100,000 that have already done it can't reverse it. But if you're thinking of doing it, it's not that I don't rate Newcastle, because I definitely do, even though I was a little bit maybe slow to get to that point. And I even like the double up. A lot of people have got Trippier and Botman, or maybe Trippier and Shah or something like that. But I just don't know why you'd spend 5.4 million on the Newcastle goalkeeper. And yes, their underlying numbers, expected goals conceded, are really good, but they're still not as good as Man City. So I think over the next kind of 6 to 7 game weeks, if you're buying a goalkeeper this week, like if you're that desperate for one, I would probably just get Ederson instead. There we go. If you enjoyed that one and found it useful, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. I did include a couple of double game week players in this video. I'm going to talk about the double game week teams even more in tomorrow's video. We're still going to have team selection, game week preview, probably final thoughts and a deadline stream, all to come ahead of game week 20 as well. So if there's anything I've missed in this video, I will try and cover it before we get to that deadline. Hopefully there'll be more information around possible double game weeks in 21 and 22 as well before we get to game week 20, and if we do get that, I'll make sure to include it in the videos as well. But I'll leave that one there. Give it a like if you enjoyed it, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you again soon.